In today's lesson, we are looking at applying properties of definite integrals. So there's 6 properties, and I'm going to keep this video pretty short and just kind of give you the properties. They're pretty easy to understand. I'm not going to really give examples for each one, just kind of talk real quick about each one. The first one is called equivalent limits. And what it says is if you have a definite integral from a to a of f of x with respect to x, it equals 0, which that makes sense if you think about you have a curve and you're finding the area under the curve from a to a, there's no width right there, so the width is 0, so you can't find an area when the width is 0, so it equals 0. Next one is called reversal of limits, and it is this. So if we have an integral from b to a, so usually it's a to b, so we've flipped it, of f of x with respect to x, then it equals negative, that same integral, flip it back to from a to b of f of x. So what this kind of means is, so we're usually, if you have something from a to b, that's what we usually do. So if we have a to b, above the curve is positive, so we're going this direction, right? Above the curve is positive and below the curve is negative. So in this case, this b to a, it's changing the direction, and what it does is it actually changes the signs. So when you're doing this, the under the curve ends up being positive when you're going this direction, and then above the curve would be negative. But essentially it's still this, the same area, it's just changing the sign. Okay, number 3, multiplying by a constant. This is very similar to the derivative rule when you are multiplying by a constant. So an integral from a to b, and then if you have a constant times a function, what you can do is just take the integral of the function, bring that constant out in front and multiply them. Okay, the next property is called adjacent intervals, and this is if there is a point C that lies in between A and B on the interval. Okay, so if you have the integral from A to C, and we're adding the integral from C to B, so notice we're ending at C here and then we're starting at C here, so there's no gap. So essentially all it is, this is the same thing as the integral from a to b. So this simply equals the integral from a to b of f of x. Okay, the next property is the addition property. So if you have the integral from a to b, and it's you're adding 2 functions, so f of x plus g of x. Also similar to when we're doing the derivatives, it's just the integral of f of x plus integral from a to b of g of x. And then here's the last property of this video. It's the subtraction property, which you can guess is basically the exact same thing as that addition property. Integral from a to b, and if you're subtracting 2 functions, you could just separate them out. Oops, g of x. Oh, don't forget dx with respect to x. Okay, so there are 6 properties of the definite integrals that we will practice on our next lesson. Good luck.